Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Looper in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Looper. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I am also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office, collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and then I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. Looper is a 2012 American science fiction action thriller Ellen, written and directed by Rian Johnson and produced by Bergman and James D. Stern. It stars Bruce Willis, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Emily Blunt. It revolves around present-day contract killers called loopers, whose targets are sent back through time by criminal syndicates from the future. Looper was selected as the opening film of the 2012 Toronto International Film Festival and was released in the United States on September 28, 2012 by TriStar Pictures 5/6. The film received critical acclaim and was a box office success, grossing $176 million worldwide on a $30 million budget.
Plot.
In 2044, 25-year-old Joe works for a Kansas City crime syndicate as an assassin or looper. Since tracking systems in the future of 2074 have made it nearly impossible to dispose of bodies undetected, the syndicate sends its enemies back in time to be executed. Managed by a man from the future named Abe, loopers kill and dispose of victims whose faces are concealed, recovering silver bars attached to their targets as payment. To hide connections to the syndicate, any loopers who survive until 2074 are sent back and killed by their own younger selves, referred to as closing the loop. These targets are identified by gold bars instead of silver, marking the end of the looper's contract. Joe's friend Seth comes to see him after Seth fails to kill his future self. Old Seth escaped after warning Seth that a person called the Rainmaker would overthrow the 5 major bosses and close all loops. Joe reluctantly hides Seth in his apartment's floor safe, but later reveals Seth's location after Abe threatens to confiscate half of Joe's saved silver. Abe's elite Gatmen capture Seth, carve an address into his arm, and begin severing his body parts. These effects appear on old Seth's body. He then goes to the address on his arm and is killed by Kid Blue, one of the Gatmen. When Joe's next target arrives, it is his older self, but with his face uncovered and hands unbound. Old Joe knocks him out and escapes. Returning to his apartment and finding it ransacked by the Gatmen, Joe fights with Kid Blue, falls off a fire escape, and blacks out. In another timeline, Joe does kill his older self. He moves to Shanghai but burns through his funds in 6 years due to his drug addiction and wild party life. Broke, he becomes a hitman. 17 years later, he marries and breaks the addiction with his wife's help. 7 years after that, his wife is killed when Joe is taken to close the loop. Overpowering his captors, old Joe sends himself back to 2044, altering his history by evading Joe and escaping. Old Joe experiences vague memories of Joe's actions in the present and meets his younger self at a diner. He wants to save his wife by killing the Rainmaker as a child. He acquires a map from a local library using numbers written on his hand that supposedly pertain to the Rainmaker's identity. Kid Blue and the Gatmen appear and a gunfight ensues. Both Joes escape with pieces of the map. Joe follows the map to a farm where a woman named Sarah lives with her young son Sid. Sarah recognizes the numbers on the map as Sid's birthday and the location of the hospital where he was born. Joe deduces that old Joe plans to kill all 3 children who were born at that hospital on the same day, not knowing which one will become the Rainmaker. Jesse, a Gatman, comes to the farm, but Sid helps Joe hide. Later that night, Sarah and Joe have sex, and Sarah reveals that while she has above-average telekinetic powers, Sid's abilities are far stronger. In the morning, Joe wakes to find Jesse holding Sarah at gunpoint. Sid kills Jesse using telekinesis. Joe realizes that Sid will become the Rainmaker and that old Joe will now know this. Kid Blue captures Old Joe and takes him to Abe. Old Joe breaks free, killing Abe and his henchmen, and goes to Sarah's farm, followed by Kid Blue. While Joe kills Kid Blue, Old Joe pursues Sarah and Sid. When Sid's face is grazed by a bullet, Sarah calms him before he can react and kill anyone. She sends Sid into a sugarcane field and positions herself to block Old Joe's line of fire. Joe realizes that if Old Joe kills Sarah, an orphaned, traumatized Sid with lethal powers will grow up to become the Rainmaker. So Joe kills himself, erasing Old Joe's existence, saving Sarah, and potentially preventing Sid from becoming the Rainmaker. Cast: Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Joe, Bruce Willis as Old Joe, Emily Blunt as Sarah, Paul Dano as Seth, Frank Brennan as Old Seth, Noah Segan as Kid Blue, Piper Perabo as Susie, Jeff Daniels as Abe, Pierce Gagnon as Sid, Summer Ching as Joe's wife, Tracy Toms as Beatrix, Garrett Dillahunt as Jesse, Nick Gomez as Dale. Production, development, and casting. Looper was written and directed by Rian Johnson, originally conceived as a short film starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt shortly after making Brick, Johnson's first feature. After Johnson released The Brothers Bloom in 2008, he re-teamed with producer Ram Bergman, who produced Johnson's previous two films, with the goal of starting production of Looper in 2009. In May 2010, Gordon-Levitt was cast in one of the lead roles, which he would play after completing Premium Rush. Later in the month, Bruce Willis was also cast. In the following October, Emily Blunt joined Gordon-Levitt and Willis. Noah Segan, Jeff Daniels, and Piper Perabo were cast in January 2011. Filming. Filming began in Louisiana on January 24, 2011. Makeup artist Kazuhiro Tsuji created the prosthetics that Gordon-Levitt wore in the film so that he would physically resemble Willis. Music. The film's score was composed by Nathan Johnson, Rian Johnson's cousin. Post-production. Talking about Looper and time travel in film, Rian Johnson said, "Even though it's a time travel movie, the pleasure of it doesn't come from the mass of time travel. It's not a film like Primer, for instance, where the big part of the enjoyment is kind of working out all the intricacies of it. For Looper, I very much wanted it to be a more character-based movie that is more about how these characters dealt with the situation time travel has brought about. So, the biggest challenge was figuring out how to not spend the whole movie explaining the rules and figure out how to put it out there in a way that made sense on some intuitive level for the audience, then get past it and deal with the real meat of the story." Other influences cited by Rian Johnson include The Terminator, Witness, Akira, Domu, A Child's Dream, 12 Monkeys, Time Crimes, and Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World. Release: theatrical. Looper premiered on September 6, 2012 at the opening night of the Toronto International Film Festival. The film was then released theatrically in the United States on September 28, 2012 by FilmDistrict, who obtained the domestic rights from production company Endgame Entertainment at the 2011 Cannes Film Festival. In turn, FilmDistrict chose to release the film with Sony Pictures over their genre label TriStar Pictures. The Chinese release of the film reintegrates a substantial number of scenes set in Shanghai. The move was requested by Chinese production company DMG Entertainment in order to further appeal to Chinese audiences. Several of these scenes were shortened or cut for the American release. Johnson released a free audio commentary on SoundCloud, which was heavily requested after making one for The Brothers Bloom, to be downloaded and listened to during the film, with the warning, "Needless to say, this is not to be listened to on a first viewing or before you've seen the film." Home media. The film was released on Blu-ray and DVD in North America on December 31, 2012. The film was also released on January 28, 2013 in online UK stores, with a general release on February 4, 2013. The film made $20,583 in domestic DVD sales and $11,468,974 from domestic Blu-ray sales for a total of $32,052,557. The film was remastered for an Ultra HD Blu-ray release in 2021. Reception. Box office. Looper opened on September 28, 2012, in 2,992 theaters in North America and grossed $20,801,522 in its opening weekend, averaging $6,952 per theater and ranking 2 at the box office. The widest release of the film in the U.S. was 2,993 theaters, and it ended up earning $66 million domestically and $110 million internationally for a total of $176.5 million against its $30 million production budget. Critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 93% of 275 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 8.110. The website's consensus reads, as thought-provoking as it is thrilling, Looper delivers an uncommonly smart, bravely original blend of futuristic sci-fi and good old-fashioned action. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 84 out of 100, based on 44 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale. James Mottram of Total Film gave Looper 5 stars out of 5, concluding that it was the best sci-fi movie since Moon, the best time travel yarn since 12 Monkeys, and one of the best films of 2012. Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter gave the film a positive review, calling it an engaging, neatly worked-out time travel sci-fi thriller, but also criticizing the effects involved in making Gordon-Levitt resemble Willis. At first, the effect is a bit odd, and you can't quite put your finger on what's off. Then it feels downright weird to be looking at a version of Gordon-Levitt who is no longer the actor you've known for a few years now. Peter DeBrugge of Variety also gave the film a positive review, writing that writer-director Johnson's grandly conceived, impressively mounted third feature shows a giddy, geeky interest in science fiction, then forces it into the back seat and lets the multidimensional characters drive. In a genre infamous for loose ends, this thinking man's thriller marshals action, romance, and a dose of very dark comedy toward a stunning payoff. Kim Newman of Empire magazine gave Looper 5 stars out of 5, writing, "Intelligent science fiction sometimes seems an endangered species. Too much physics, and there's a risk of creating something cold and remote. Too many explosions and get lost in the multiplex. Looper isn't perfect, but it pulls off the full Wizard of Oz. It has a brain, courage, and a heart." Noel Murray of the AV Club gave the film an A- grade, writing, "Looper is a remarkable feat of imagination and execution, entertaining from start to finish, even as it asks the audience to contemplate how and why humanity keeps making the same rotten mistakes." Kenneth Turan of the Los Angeles Times gave the film a positive review, writing, "Looper is way inventive, but it wears its creativity lightly, like it's no big deal. This is a high-flying, super-stylish science fiction thriller that brings a fresh approach to mind-bending genre material. We're not always sure where this time travel film is going, but we wouldn't dream of abandoning the ride." Claudia Puig of USA Today gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, writing, "Looper's heady blend of time travel, gritty action, and a jot of romance is such a thrilling and cerebral mind-bender that it will likely have moviegoers gathering outside the theater afterward to hash out details of its intricately constructed universe. Not that that's a bad thing." Peter Travers of Rolling Stone also gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, praising the performances of Willis and Gordon-Levitt and concluding, "Lacing tremendously exciting action with touching gravity, Looper hits you like a shot in the heart." Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times also gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, praising its screenplay, stating, "Looper, a smart and tricky sci-fi story, sidesteps the paradoxes of time travel by embracing them. Most time travel movies run into trouble in the final scenes when impossibilities pile up one upon another. This film leads to a startling conclusion that wipes out the story's paradoxes so neatly it's as if it never happened." Lisa Schwartzbaum of Entertainment Weekly gave the film a B+ grade, writing, "The time swivels in Looper evoke some of Inception's fancy temporal tricks, some of which, of course, also involved Gordon-Levitt straddling multiple time zones at once. But it's the glimpses of children of men like societal dystopia that give the movie its real weight." Keith Staskiewicz, also writing for Entertainment Weekly, reviewing the DVD, and also giving a B+, said, "The film's premise is markedly inventive. and writer-director Rian Johnson spends a lot of time making his universe seem lived in and believable. But he's not just concerned with whiz-bang what-ifs. The showdown of selves illuminates just how little Gordon-Levitt's character has changed over the intervening years, stuck as he is in a feedback loop of drug use and violence despite his pipe dream of moving to Europe. The retro trench coats and firearms also suggest a sort of eternal recurrence, and as Looper's plot gets more complex, its central question simplifies. If we can't fix our mistakes, can we at least make sure we don't repeat the same ones over and over again? Richard Corliss of Time magazine gave the film a positive review, calling Looper a hybrid, mashing Quentin Tarantino and Philip K. Dick into a species of pulp science fiction, and also writing, a fanciful film with the patina of hyperrealism, Looper is well served by actors who behave not as if they were dropped carelessly into the future, but spent their whole desperate lives there. Dana Stevens of Slate gave the film a mixed review, writing, Looper felt to me like a maddening near miss. It posits an impossible but fascinating to imagine relationship, a face-to-face encounter between one's present and future self, in which each self must account for its betrayal of the other, and then throws away nearly all the dramatic potential that relationship offers. Accolades. Rian Johnson's Looper is very exciting and very confusing at the same time. A gripping time travel sci-fi thriller indebted to Christopher Nolan's Memento and James Cameron's The Terminator, but with its own creepiness and muscular sense of urgency. Bewilderingly, the film is set in the future, in 2044, and also 30 years further ahead than that. In 2074, time travel is invented and at once made illegal by a nervous government. At the same time, surveillance technology and CSI-style forensic skills make killing people very difficult. So crime syndicates get hold of a samizdat time travel device and use this to remove troublesome people. Victims are whooshed back in time 30 years, where lowly paid assassins blast them with shotguns and get paid in silver bars strapped to the victim's body. But there's a catch. The killers are known as loopers, because one day they must close the loop. Their future middle-aged selves must be liquidated, because they have amassed too much information about their employer, so are sent back in time for assassination with the special retirement payoff of gold bars strapped on. The younger self must then pull the trigger and accept, with as much Zen calm as possible, his disappearance in 30 years. One of these loopers is Joe, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, above, but when his older self, played by Bruce Willis, comes back, he somehow evades the execution and Joe has to hunt himself down. As with all time travel movies, there is an awkward moment when one character asks plaintively about the logical impossibilities inherent in what's happening, and another character tells him to just shut up and forget about it. Of course, there is no sense in the time travel in Looper, but no less sense than in any other film in this genre. Johnson makes up for it with narrative force, mesmeric fascination, and a sense of a profound taboo being broken. Gordon-Levitt is made up oddly, to look like Willis's younger self, of course, but this has an uncanny effect, adding to the mutant strangeness that pervades the movie. It's different from the comedy in Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future, 1985, and the deadpan science in Shane Carruth's cult indie primer, 2004. There is violence and fear. Criminals have corrupted the very tenets of space and time. Jeff Daniels has a funny cameo as Abe, the gang boss who has to make excursions back in time to check this side of the operation is running smoothly. He is contemptuous of Joe taking French lessons and tells him to learn Mandarin because China is going to be all important. I'm from the future, I know. I left Looper dizzy with excitement, and also just dizzy. Rian Johnson's Looper, a smart and tricky sci-fi story, sidesteps the paradoxes of time travel by embracing them. Most time travel movies run into trouble in the final scenes, when impossibilities pile up one upon another. This film leads to a startling conclusion that wipes out the story's paradoxes so neatly it's as if it never happened. You have to grin at the ingenuity of Johnson's screenplay. The movie takes place in 2044 and 2074, both of which look like plausible variations of the American present, and then there are a few scenes set in a futuristic Shanghai. We learn that although time travel is declared illegal once it has been discovered, a crime syndicate cheats and uses it as a method for disposing of its enemies. Imagine this. A man with shotgun stands by himself in a field. A second man materializes out of thin air. The first man blasts a hole in him. The thin air guy, who was bound and hooded, is a man from the future who has been sent back in time to be assassinated. The shotgun guy is known as a looper. He has been sent back into time to be the trigger man. Eventually, when he grows old enough, he will be sent back in time to be killed by his own younger self. This is known as closing the loop. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays Joe, the trigger man in 2044. Bruce Willis plays Old Joe, sent back from the future. The loop is not closed, however, because Old Joe arrives without a hood, and young Joe hesitates when he realizes his latest target is himself. He knew that would happen eventually, it's part of the deal, but a hood would have prevented him from knowing which victim was himself. This leads to the kind of weird scene that only time travel makes possible. The two Joes go to a nearby diner, grab a booth, and have a conversation. Imagine that you're sitting across from yourself with a 3-decade age difference. This is an opening for an endless conversation about the emotional and metaphysical implications of the meeting, but Johnson perhaps wisely makes their conversation more pragmatic. Perhaps professional hitmen aren't inclined toward philosophy. The story gains depth with the introduction of romance. In most thrillers, female characters tend toward eye candy and are extraneous to the plot. Not here. Young Joe meets Sarah, Emily Blunt, a fiercely independent woman who lives on a Kansas farm with her son Sid, Pierce Gagnon. Although young Joe has literally come from nowhere, they slowly grow close. In the future, we learn Old Joe was married and his wife, Summer Ching, was murdered by a figure known as the Rainmaker. It's not revealing too much to tell that Old Joe has reason to believe that young Sid may grow up to become the Rainmaker, and so Old and young Joe are trapped in a situation with no pleasant prospects. The film is further enriched by the performances of Jeff Daniels as Abe, the future boss of the crime syndicate, and by Paul Dano as Seth, a friend of Old Joe who fears the loop is about to be closed on him. Think this through. If the loop is closed on you, did you never exist? Or did you live your younger life up until the point you kill your older self? Looper, to its credit, doesn't avoid this question. It's up to you to decide if it answers it. Time travel may be logically impossible, but once we allow a film to use it, we have to be grateful if it makes sense according to its own rules. Rian Johnson's first feature was the well-received low-budget indie titled Brick, 2005, which told a high school story in a film noir style narrated by Gordon-Levitt. The second was the con man puzzlement The Brothers Bloom, 2009. Now time travel. In all three, he begins with generic expectations and then confounds them. The key is in his writing. Looper weaves between past and present in a way that gives Johnson and his actors opportunities to create a surprisingly involving narrative. Looper, an obstreperously entertaining, bullet and attitude-ridden science fiction pastiche, opens in a futuristic world that looks and sounds paradoxically out of the past. Set in 2044 in a dystopia with Turner Classic Movies flavor, it puts a spin on the familiar figure of the existentially troubled gun for hire, while leaving a layer of dust on many of the other genre fundamentals it plays with. Some of it you've seen and heard before, intentionally so, though it adds a weird wrinkle, an attempt to transform Joseph Gordon-Levitt, his nose prosthetically bobbed, and a smirk surfing his thinned upper lip into the wisecracking Bruce Willis of the moonlighting years. The ostensible reason for Mr. Gordon-Levitt's extreme makeover is that he and Mr. Willis are playing the same contract killer Joe at different ages. A looper, the young Joe works for an outfit that exists 30 years beyond 2044, where time travel exists but is illegal. Whenever the outfit wants to dispose of a problem, it sends the problem with a hood over his head into the past, where a looper is waiting with a gun to blow him to smithereens. The hook, you can almost hear the original movie pitch, it's so tidy, is that every so often the outfit sends back an older looper who's unknowingly killed by his younger self, which is how the 2044 Joe stares down his middle-aged counterpart. It isn't a happy meeting, but the writer and director Rian Johnson makes it a largely diverting one, filled with wit, smashing edits and showy, at times distracting illusions that reflect his cleverness like little mirrors. Slamming genre-cheap thrills together with high art aspirations, Mr. Johnson spins a fast-moving entertainment out of a setup that could have been cooked up by the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick was undoubtedly influenced by Chris Marker's cinematic touchstone from 1962, La Jetée, in which scientists in a post-apocalyptic world send, as the film puts it, emissaries into time to call past and future to the rescue of the present. The middle-aged Joe sets off on a similar mission, trying to persuade his younger self to go along. It's a juicy premise, ripe for the squeezing, though it takes a while to get over Joe's looking less like a young Mr. V. Willis and more like Keanu Reeves with a dash of Marlon Brando doing Japanese minstrel for the tea house of the August moon. Mr. Johnson throws a lot at the screen, blasted corpses included, yet little here is as initially transfixing as Mr. Gordon-Levitt's mug. The makeover is a distracting miscalculation, and a curious one given that, for his last movie, The Brothers Bloom, Mr. Johnson cast the non-lookalikes Adrian Brody and Mark Ruffalo in the title roles. Even so, after the bodies and plot twists pile up, and after you've scoped out the Bruceified downward curve of Mr. Gordon-Levitt's nose, and laughed when he worriedly touches his receding hairline, the movie starts getting its groove on. There's a lot to get past, including an antediluvian divide between hard-charging men and decorative dames, including a stripper, Susie Piper Perabo, who works at a club called La Belle Aurore, the name of the Paris joint where Humphrey Bogart once met Ingrid Bergman. As time goes by, indeed, or as Mr. Johnson prefers, loops the loop. Using some metaphysical shorthand, he also alludes to the cosmic cup of coffee brewed by Jean-Luc Godard in 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her. Things, or rather the gender politics, improve once Joe, fleeing the outfit, with his older self nearby, takes refuge at a farmhouse belonging to Sarah, an appealing Emily Blunt, a single mom with a strange little boy, Sid, an excellent Pierce Gagnon. There, Mr. Johnson settles into something deeper, swaps the banner for real feelings, and wins you over. We live in a time in which overreaching types chirp about illusory import in tentpole pictures, as if these massive movies with overcompensating budgets are akin to down-on-their-luck paraplegics seeking strangers in the streets to buy them hot meals. Slate's Dana Stevens tells us that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy represents war on terror allegories. Mark Ruffalo explains to the Wall Street Journal that The Avengers, which is little more than a very pleasant popcorn movie, is a complex take on American life. While I've never shied away from expressing enthusiasm for genre or well-crafted mass entertainment, there is nevertheless a clear distinction between what Jon Favreau and what Alejandro Jodorowsky are trying to commit to film. Yet Rian Johnson's Looper won me over, despite a frustratingly paradoxical finale that contradicts 2 hours of story logic. Here is a film that isn't just interested in entertaining, although I must confess that I was thrilled by one late scene in which Bruce Willis blew away a considerable number of baddies. When it comes to satisfying on-screen violence, I'm just as red-blooded as the next guy. Much as the underrated Daybreakers took care in establishing a consequential world, complete with homeless vampires holding cardboard signs which read "Starving Need Blood," Looper is smart enough to understand that a good time travel movie is all about the peripheral deets. The Back to the Future trilogy remains a repeat viewing draw because we wonder if Doc Brown ever really said, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. He doesn't, despite the characters crediting him as the source. Then there are complicated films like Shane Carruth's excellent Primer, which contains so many interpretive possibilities that one can easily get lost in its low-budget, high-concept Chinese box. Looper contains a narrative we'll eventually figure out. We learn that Joseph Simmons, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is a looper who kills time travelers with a blunderbuss a mere instant after they appear out of nowhere upon a blue trap. These fidgety executions establish an inconsequential tone which allows us to ponder why Joe's in this line of work. Isn't Arby's still hiring? Surely, given the film's barely touched steak and egg specials, there's a need for crappy roast beef sandwiches in the year 2044. But the career is lucrative, although paper currency is nowhere to be found. Has the dollar collapsed? Joe's saving up his silver bars for a post-killing life. He's learning French. He keeps time to an old watch. He cannot let these time travelers escape. We learn that in 30 years, someone will kill him. All part of the job. This is a somewhat silly setup. If you think about it, a looper has to accept on faith that the future is fixed. We understand that time travel is forbidden because of a dangerous criminal syndicate, but if it's so problematic, why doesn't anyone track down the guy who developed it? A looper has to accept that the people who run the operation, this includes a grizzly, gray-bearded Jeff Daniels, can be trusted. This is probably why Johnson has made Joseph somewhat dissolute. He wastes his hours with the inventive aesthetic of drugs he can plop into his eye with an eyedropper. That's certainly less messy than Panics in Needle Park. I'm giving Johnson a hard time, but he does manage to get performances from his cast. Bruce Willis, with a strangely satisfying fixed hairline this time around, juggles intensity and contrition as Old Joe, the guy that Joseph Gordon-Levitt grows up to be, despite the two actors sharing quite different ears. I'm not the greatest Emily Blunt fan, but I'll take her firing bullets into the cornfields. There's an incredible kid with fierce eyes named Pierce Gagnon who will probably go places, assuming that he doesn't end up as some former child star shooting up in a seedy motel during his early adult years. Even Garrett Dillahunt, the quirky and misunderstood character actor who was the goofy T-888 in the Sarah Connor Chronicles, shows up endearingly befuddled. I don't feel any particular need to describe the plot. Let others do that. It's basically a showdown between Joe and Old Joe, with some twists coming late in the film. We get telekinesis and a number of impressive jet cycles, geeky shorthand for the AD crowd. What impressed me about Looper was the way it depicts a future where today's everyday conveniences are missing. Some unknown upheaval has gone down between 2012 and 2044. The world here is a barely civilized place waiting to be overrun by desperate crooks. Touchpad technology is hidden behind secret panels. Smartphones have transformed into barely functioning squares, largely used by the loopers, and nobody whips these out while walking the streets. We see tents and homeless encampments on the outskirts of cities, with the word vagrant taking on a sinister tone. The unemployed have clearly expanded to include a larger and more invisible class of humanity. And I liked how the film made the daring choice of following those who were well off, further suggesting that one had to become terribly immoral to have a nice house. There are makeshift solar panels haphazardly affixed to cars, and at least one farmhouse, without any clear standard. And when you consider the black tubing leading to where a truck's gas tank used to be, you figure that there was some last-ditch effort to respond to a fossil fuel crisis. The loopers get the flashy sports cars. The jet cycles go to the authorities. The losers don't even get a set of steak knives. And yet somehow it's possible to keep a diner operating in the middle of nowhere. It's still possible to maintain a farm with helpful insecticide-sprinkling robots. There are still upscale nightclubs kept alive by the looper class. I like that the film offered no reasons for any of this, even as it resolved the main plot like some half-baked episode of Time Tracks. It doesn't really matter what time we live in. Looper makes its own case for human connection and sacrifice, but it also suggests that the larger world is more fixed and unstoppable than we realize. Shouldn't we get down to the business of living rather than seeing what fits the given mood? Kansas 2044. Time travel will be invented in 30 years' time and quickly made illegal. It will be used only by criminal gangs to send targets back to loopers, cold-blooded killers employed to murder decades away from detection. The victim arrives out of thin air, hands tied, head covered. The looper pulls the trigger, collects his cut of silver, briquettes of precious metal attached to the mark's back, and burns the body. Once in a blue moon, the target arrives strapped in gold, the first sign that the looper's contract has been terminated. He rolls the body over, takes off the mask, and confirms that he's killed himself. His loop's been closed. Rian Johnson's sharp, smart sci-fi thriller runs on such bizarre ritual. Delayed suicide is part of the cycle for loopers like Joe, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who's eager for the chance to tap out and enjoy his last 30 years as he wants. His life until then is locked in a well-worn circuit. An assassination, steak and eggs at his favorite diner, a quick flirt with the waitress, then the trip to the city with the same clubs, the same drugs, the same girls. Around him, the economy has flatlined. Only Joe and his kind, well-paid, stylish, arrogant playboys have the money to zip around in sleek flying machines. Joe's expecting to meet and kill himself. It's only when his older self, Bruce Willis, escapes assassination that the system is undone. Joe Sr. has seen the future, likes where it leads, and doesn't want to give it up. Joe Jr., mindful of the punishment that's dealt out to renegades by his boss, Jeff Daniels, needs to track him down and finish the job. From there, Johnson hauls us through a cat-and-mouse chase, peppered with great dialogue and 2 showcase performances from Willis and Gordon-Levitt, who's nailed the pained look of befuddlement, the mannered slouch in the walk that made Willis a star. Even when Johnson winds down their screen time to make room for a side story featuring a prairie mom, Emily Blunt, and her mysteriously gifted son, Looper still ticks along. Johnson's debut, Brick, asked a lot of its audience, incited you to keep up. Those who found his noirish high school murder mystery too portentous might struggle with Looper. At its best, it's a similarly dense film. But once you commit to the lexicon, to the blunderbusses, the silver, the loops that close, and the loops let run, you're in for a breathless ride. It's been a patchy summer for sci-fi, absent of anything that really sticks in the mind. Johnson's deep, distinctive film plays on repeat Looper review. When 2 versions of the same man sit in a diner discussing time travel paradoxes, it's almost a relief that the older, not necessarily wiser, incarnation tries to change the subject, claiming that talking too much about this stuff makes your head hurt and they'll only end up drawing diagrams on the table. Of course, one point of this scene is to admit that we've been here before and will most likely pass this way again. Headache-inducing paradoxes have been a part of the time travel subgenre of science fiction ever since Mark Twain and H.G. Wells first set out to close the loop. Here a synonym for a combination of murder and suicide, and the movies have evolved a complicated visual language for depicting the process of history being rewritten. An early crucial sequence of Looper shows an old man, Frank Brennan, on the run while his younger self, Paul Dano, is being tortured. Suddenly, his past is altered so that messages appear written on his arm in long-healed scars, and his fingers, facial features, and limbs disappear as his memory is rewritten to give him a life of 30 years as a mangled basket case. Otherwise, narration sets up the premise and nudges you not to ask too many questions. Like recent, clunkier SF action films, Repo Men, Surrogates, and In Time, a whole noirish society is built around one new tech trick, and we just have to accept it to get into the chase flow. The title might even be a conscious echo of Michael Crichton's Looker, an early example of single-issue dystopian cinema, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's presence carries over from the one recent unassailable triumph of the form, Inception. Surely, even in a society run by CSI Hell, the justification for time travel as an alternative to dropping a corpse off the East Pier with feet in a bucket of concrete, there are easier ways of getting rid of a disappointing associate than zapping them into the past to be gunned down at the edge of a cornfield, which has the same purpose as the forest glade in Miller's Crossing. Also, a sociopathic master crook with a monopoly on time travel tech should have more ambitious ways to mess with history than this, especially when the mysterious Rainmaker, crime boss of the future's future, seems to have no qualms about dickering with the space-time continuum in the way most SF franchises are sniffy about. Those quibbles are literally beside the point, which is, despite a level of plot complication that a degree in quantum physics won't help you sort out, a simple, emotional truth. If you could go back in time and tell your younger self where he was going wrong, the kid still wouldn't listen to you. And if you saw how badly things were going to turn out, you'd probably just make them worse. With the high school noir Brick and the conman triangle drama The Brothers Bloom, writer-director Rian Johnson established himself as a distinctive voice in mid-budget coffeehouse cinema, the sort whose projects offer the kind of well-written roles that persuade established actors to take pay cuts to take part. Here, he's up a level, delivering a post-economic collapse dystopia with an interesting city-country divide which harks back to the Depression. The heroine has to defend her homestead against marauding hobos who failed to make the cut in the big city and gets to do comic book act sequences with hover bikes, oversized guns, the brutal retro weaponry is nicely designed, and Akira-like telekinetic prodigies. But it's still crackling dialogue and unusual characterizations which hold the interest in a genre where those qualities are too often deemed superfluous. Looper connects where, say, Surrogates missed because it feels as if its world has been thought out properly, but also its characters make sense as inhabitants of it. The protagonist is a gangland killer hooked on an eye-drop drug, a nod to that semi-forgotten dystopia, Harley-Davidson and the Marlboro Man. Because of the way he was brought up in hard times and found a father-family substitute in the gang run by a refugee from the future, Jeff Daniels, whose tips, learn Mandarin, he ignores as he clings to nostalgic retro items like red vinyl records. Joseph Gordon-Levitt has to put up with an effects makeover, which turns him into an acceptable young Bruce Willis, to avoid the young Emma Thompson didn't look like Alice Eve complaint some made about Men in Black 3. He also does a creditable job of not imitating the Bruce of Moonlighting or Die Hard, but depicting the kind of callous, incipiently sensitive young gunman who might grow up to be the battered, baldy Willis now plays. It's an irony that if you had time travel and could cast young Bruce Willis in this, you'd still give the role to Gordon-Levitt, whose collaboration with Johnson, after starring in Brick, he had a bit part in The Brothers Bloom, is becoming a regular and noteworthy teaming. A 30-year montage shows how one Joe turns into the other in a hard life on the run, with a redemptive late-in-the-day romance, but the circumstances of the story which brings them together invalidates all this. So young Joe has to fast forward through the tough lessons and emotional maturing older Joe has taken decades on. As in The Adjustment Bureau, a couple of moments in the company of Emily Blunt proves the tonic. Like Rachel Weisz in The Brothers Bloom, she gets to do a great deal more than be someone for the heroes to fight over, and her character nurtures secrets that liven up the third act no end. There are, of course, references to the Terminator. Garrett Dillahunt, from the Sarah Connor Chronicles TV series, shows up in a good cameo as a different type of gat-wielding killing machine, and 12 Monkeys, another of Bruce Willis's surprisingly frequent ventures into the fourth dimension, when older Joe decides he can solve his problems by murdering the crime boss of the future, who is currently a school kid. But Johnson takes an unexpected approach to the would you kill Hitler quandary. There's one surprise everyone will see coming, but before the film gets there, it does several things. Notably, an unforgivable act any less independent-minded auteur would probably let himself be talked out of, that come completely out of left field. Before I had so much as seen a trailer, Looper was one of my most anticipated movie releases of 2012. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is quickly turning into a guy whose movies I can just assume will be good, plus, Bruce Willis. Throw in one hell of an intriguing premise, and I was pre-sold on this one. Thankfully, it turned out to be rather good, and not even in the way I was expecting. Looper leans on a potentially convoluted sci-fi idea. Time travel exists in its world, but only in the future, where it is illegal and where organized crime syndicates have a difficult time disposing of corpses. Enter loopers, contracted hitmen who kill any hooded victim sent back to them without so much as a bat of an eyelid. They dispatch with an old-school blunderbuss, collect their fee from the body of the dead, and then incinerate said body. Then they go get high off an eye-drop-based narcotic and live their lives fast and loose, because someday they know that they will have to close their loop or kill their future selves. One day our anti-hero Joe, Joseph Gordon-Levitt in Bruce Willis-esque makeup, does meet his future self, the actual Willis, but he escapes and things get steadily more complex from there. As with any time travel film, there are issues that arise from the mythology in use here. Yet the film does a fairly decent job of keeping its plot holes covered up because it doesn't really focus on its sci-fi trappings much at all. The key parts are explained well in the opening sequences, and then the jargon gets out of the way for the most part so that the characters can come to the forefront. And that they do, thanks to some quality performances from all the leads. Spoiling the twisty plot would defeat the purpose of seeing Looper, but suffice to say that Bruce Willis is given some emotionally intense material to chew on throughout the story, and he handles it like a screen veteran should. Emily Blunt's complicated, secretive single mother is enjoyable to watch, as the role is certainly something different from what audiences may be used to seeing her in. Pierce Gagnon steals a couple of scenes as her young son, including a hilarious multiplication practice sequence, and Jeff Daniels is fun as Joe's immediate boss. Yet Joseph Gordon-Levitt stands out from them all, as he should, thanks to an eerie understanding of Willis's mannerisms, facial expressions, and way of speaking. Makeup or no, he is a dead ringer for his co-star right when he needs to be. The Gungi world built around these characters is well realized, particularly in service of the plot, which I really want to talk about but shouldn't. The screenplay is tight, which is so important in a sci-fi film. It does what it needs to do, throws around a decent amount of humor, and serves up at least 3 effectively shocking moments. The gray morality behind each version of Joe is handled in a way that leaves the audience members as final judges of his character, which can be hard to pull off. Director Rian Johnson has done an impressive job making the complex idea behind Looper work as well as it can as a movie. I eagerly await whatever he does next. First thing, if you haven't seen Brick, stop reading this and go watch it. If you have seen Brick, stop reading this and go watch it again. Great! Now that you're back, you're welcome, and let's continue. Looper is the third film from writer-director Rian Johnson, who blasted onto the indie filmmaking scene with the aforementioned Brick, creating an instant stir and a huge level of expectation for future projects. He followed it up with The Brothers Bloom, a quirky and more humorously emotional film than his debut. 4 years later, we finally get the next volume in Johnson's catalog, and many of us have been waiting with bated breath. Looper is a sci-fi time travel tale about an assassin in the not-too-distant future who kills people sent back to him from the slightly more distant future. This cold-blooded killer, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is known as a looper, and he knows one day the person sent back to die will be himself, thereby closing the loop. Yet when faced with the older version of Joe, Bruce Willis, the present-day version fails to get the job done and begins a harrowing chase to settle the score and figure out why the future version of him wants to live so badly. The description above is fully accurate, but it leaves out a huge plot point in the story because it's a spoiler. So if you don't want to know any more about the film, stop here and come back when you've seen it for yourself. Okay, now that you've been warned, spoilers ahead, second and last warning, here's the rest. Willis comes back hunting for a mythical mobster from the future called the Rainmaker, who in his time period is closing all the loops en masse. He is also partially responsible for killing Willis's future wife, something Willis is determined to fix in the past by finding and killing the Rainmaker as a child. The biggest problem with Looper overall is both plot descriptions are true, but they could be entire movies on their own. Tied together into one script, the balance between the two is shaky. For the first half of the movie, it is nearly all about Levitt versus Willis in a game of cat and mouse, all while trying to avoid the present-day mafia who are trying to kill them both. Yet, somewhere around the halfway mark, the movie slows down considerably while we dive into the deep end of the pool with the Rainmaker storyline, with added performances from Emily Blunt and Pierce Gagnon on a random stretch of farmland. Script issues aside, there is always going to be a debate on the topic of time travel and how it plays out in the film. In this realm, Johnson tosses the logic and technology of it out the window with pleasant abandon, even having Willis yell out in a critical scene, "It doesn't matter." For me, it was a nice touch and should be heeded by future filmmakers who dare to use time travel as a plot device. Don't get bogged down in the details of how it works, because in the end it doesn't. The performances are also worth mentioning here, with a special nod to the makeup department. Levitt underwent a truly amazing and subtle transformation into a younger version of Willis, and it definitely had an effect on not only how he played the character, but how the audience reacts to him. Levitt is reaching a level of star status that will soon overcome his on-screen characters because we will all know exactly who he is, currently known as the Tom Cruise effect. But with the slight manipulation of Levitt's face, it was almost hard to remember it was actually him on screen. He delivered the same quality and intensity we have become accustomed to, and that helps buoy the film during the slower portions. Also, Pierce Gagnon is incredibly intense for such a young kid. Keep an eye on him if they ever do another sequel to the Children of the Corn franchise. He'd be a shoo-in. In an overall look back, there is a moral question that pervades the film and strains to link the two stories, but both weren't necessary to answer it, and a strong choice as to what the film was really about would have simplified it and delivered a much stronger final product. Time travel is one of those fun and intriguing concepts that has found its way into every movie genre. Obviously, there is time travel in science fiction films, but it can also be found in the horror, action, drama, comedy, and even romance genres. So there's an apparent attraction to the idea of time travel, and it's been explored in a variety of different ways. Therefore, the real challenge for a filmmaker is to take this familiar subject and give us something new and fresh, something we haven't seen before. I'm thrilled to say that's exactly what writer and director Rian Johnson has done with his mind-bending sci-fi action film Looper. As you can guess, Looper takes place in the not-too-distant future. Time travel has been realized, but by the year 2074, it has been outlawed. The crime syndicates illegally use time travel as a means of executing and disposing of targets, something that has grown increasingly difficult to do in their time. That's where loopers come in. They are mob killers who execute the targets sent from the future, collect the silver bars sent with the target as their reward, and then dispose of the bodies. No mess and no connections to the mob. Loopers operate out of Kansas City in the year 2044 and are headed by a mobster named Abe Jeff Daniels. In fact, we learn that Abe is essentially running the entire city. Joseph Simmons, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is one of Abe's most trusted loopers. He's efficient and by the books. But soon Joe is faced with what's called closing the loop, the syndicate's version of retirement. You see, the looper will be sent the future version of the himself to be executed. No party or shiny plaque, just a hefty payment in gold bars and a release from their contract. Goodbye and enjoy the next 30 years. As we hear in the movie, the looper job doesn't attract the most forward-thinking people. Joe is surprised and unprepared when his latest target turns out to be himself, only 30 years older and bald, Bruce Willis. He makes the biggest mistake a looper can make. He hesitates and old Joe jumps him, knocks him out, and then escapes. Soon young Joe has the mob hot on his trail as he's trying to make things right by catching up with and killing old Joe. But old Joe has a mission of his own which really turns everything on its head. The first half of the movie focuses more on the loopers, on introducing us to Johnson's world and setting up Gordon-Levitt's character. A huge part of any movie like this, especially when dealing with time travel, is creating a believability to what you're presenting. In other words, we need to buy into what we're being shown. The concept behind this Rian Johnson futuristic concoction is brilliant and a breath of fresh cinematic air. What's even more impressive is how well it's realized on screen. He doesn't overdo his futuristic landscape, so I never felt too disconnected from this world. But there is some cool technology, and Johnson clearly has fun with some of it, including his ugly green energy-dependent cars and the bad cell phone reception. But the city itself is a dirty and unpleasant place filled with poverty and drug use. Just what you would expect from a mob-led city. The second half of the movie takes a slight change in direction. Much of it takes part on a farm outside of town, owned by a single mother, Sarah, Emily Blunt, who exchanges her English accent for a country girl one, and her son, Sid, Pierce Gagnon. Young Joe's search for old Joe leads him to the farm where he hopes to find shelter from the syndicate and clues to what his older self is up to. But he quickly learns that there's more to this farm family than meets the eye. These scenes add some authentic emotional punch to the film. But Johnson also uses this part of the movie to open up several new doors which add more and more layers to the already challenging story. Of course, there were a couple of times where I had to stop and process what I had just seen, but I really liked these different directions, and as a whole, the complex yet miraculously cohesive script is constructed with such intelligence and precision so that I never felt lost, nor did I feel the material ever bogged down. It's also worth mentioning the spectacular visuals and no-holds-barred action sequences. It doesn't take long to recognize Johnson's skill with framing shots and moving his camera. He uses several unconventional techniques which give the move a unique look. We get several close-ups where Johnson wants the expressions of his characters to tell the story. He also oftentimes places his camera at ground level, giving us the feeling we are looking up at them. This is very effective, particularly during the build-up to a couple of key action scenes. Speaking of the action, it is incredibly done. It's a brutal and violent mix of sci-fi and 1980s gun-blazing action, and both work extremely well. Johnson doesn't skimp on the blood, but it feels right at home in this picture. I also have to talk about the acting. The performances in Looper are solid throughout, with some being Oscar caliber in my opinion. Joseph Gordon-Levitt continues to prove that he's a top Hollywood talent. Here, he's armed with heavy makeup, a prosthetic nose, and a Bruce Willis smirk. The funny thing is he channels Willis perfectly from his slouch to his expressions, all while giving a very different performance than Willis. And speaking of Willis, he is excellent here. What stood out was the range that he shows in this performance. For instance, there are scenes where he's a cranky codger, an emotional wreck, and laugh-out-loud funny, but there were also scenes that reminded me of John McClane from Die Hard, steadily yelling while his machine gun pumps loads of lead. Emily Blunt is fantastic as always, Jeff Daniels just eats up his lines, and Paul Dano plays the same measly, wormy character that he always plays. Then there is young Pierce Gagnon, who is phenomenal. He's such a tender presence, but his performance goes well beyond that standard cute kid role. He's given a lot to do, and he really stands out. I'm sure it's obvious by now that I really liked Looper. But it's not a perfect movie. While the story is intensely original and thoroughly engaging, there are a few plot holes as well as some pointless throwaway scenes in the first half of the movie. For example, early on, we see young Joe has a relationship with a prostitute. He appears to be quite fond of her, even though she's only in a couple of scenes, one of which seems to be there strictly to add some pointless content to the film. This time could have been spent better elsewhere. I also couldn't help but ask the question, what type of crime organization would actually hire Paul Dano's character to be a looper? His performance is fine, but I had a hard time believing in him. That said, he did provide us with one of the film's very best sequences. I'll just leave it at that. I could go on and on about Looper, but let me just sum it up by saying that it's the most ambitious and imaginative movie I've seen all year. It's smart and audacious, and Rian Johnson actually pulls it all off. It's completely unpredictable, and no matter how hard you try, you never catch up with it. It's always one step ahead of you. Looper takes the familiar device of time travel to new places through a brilliantly original concept. Johnson lays out that concept clearly for the audience. Then he takes it, shakes it, twists it, and contorts it, and then challenges the audience to keep up. He dabbles in different genres and themes, examines societies, questions morality, and asks us to take it all in and process it. That's something I'm happy to do, especially when the movie is this good. Looper is way inventive, but it wears its creativity lightly, like it's no big deal. This is a high-flying, super stylish science fiction thriller that brings a fresh approach to mind-bending genre material. We're not always sure where this time travel film is going, but we wouldn't dream of abandoning the ride, Claudia P.G. of USA Today gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, writing Looper heady blend of time travel, gritty action, and a jot of romance is such a thrilling and cerebral mind-bender that it will likely have moviegoers gathering outside the theater afterward to hash out details of its intricately constructed universe. Not that that's a bad thing. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone also gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, praising the performances of Willis and Gordon-Levitt, and concluding lacing tremendously. Exciting action with touching gravity, Looper hits you like a shot in the heart. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times also gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, praising its screenplay, stating Looper, a smart and tricky sci-fi story, sidesteps the paradoxes of time travel by embracing them. Most time travel movies run into trouble in the final scenes. When impossibilities pile up one upon another, this film leads to a startling conclusion that wipes out the story paradoxes so neatly it's as if it never happened. Lisa Schwartz of Entertainment Weekly gave the film a B+ grade, writing, "The time swivels in Looper evoke some of Inception's fancy temporal tricks, some of which, of course, also involved Gordon-Levitt straddling multiple time zones at once, but it's the glimpses of children of men-like societal dystopia that give the movie its real." Wait, Keith Statkevich, also writing for Entertainment Weekly, reviewing the DVD, and also giving a B+, said the film's premise is markedly inventive, and director Rian Johnson spends a lot of time making his universe seem lived in and believable, but he's not just concerned with whiz-bang Watts. The showdown of S illuminates just how little Gordon-Levitt's character has changed over the intervening years, stuck as he is in a feedback loop of drug use and violence, despite his pipe dream of moving to Europe. The retro trench coats and firearms also suggest a sort of eternal recurrence, and as Looper plot gets more complex, its central question simplifies: if we can't fix our mistakes, can we at least make sure we don't repeat the same ones over and over again? Richard Corus of Time magazine gave the film a positive review, calling Looper a hybrid mashing Quentin Tarantino and Philip K. Dick into a spees of pulp science fiction, and also writing a fanciful film with the patina of hyperrealism. Looper is well served by actors who behave not as if they were dropped carelessly into the future, but spent their whole desperate lives there. Dana Stevens of Slate gave the film a mixed review, writing, "Looper felt to me like a maddening nearness. It posits an impossible but fascinating to imagine relationship, a face-to-face encounter between one's present and future self, in which each self must account for its betrayal of the other, and then throws away nearly all the dramatic potential. That relationship offers Looper movie review. I am obsessed with time travel. Since the tender age of 9, when I was first introduced to the original classic time machine, it has fascinated me in every way. The possibilities are endless. The ripple effects through time have always been mind-boggling for me. Combine this passion with the love that I have for Bruce Willis, and much like 12, Monkeys Before Looper was an absolute no-brainer for me. First things first, Bruce is back in the swing of things as the baddest mammer jammer in this time, or any other for that matter. He is still very much Bruce in his performance as Old Joe, but at this point in his career, that has become just fine. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays an absolutely spectacular impersonation of Bruce Willis as young Joe, a looper that has been hired by mob bosses 30 years in the future to dispose of their dirty laundry in the past. You can tell within the first 15 minutes that he really studied Bruno's mannerisms and expressions. To be honest, I actually found his facial enhancements that were meant to give him more of a likeness to Bruce a bit distracting at times, and I totally believe that he could have pulled off the impression wonderfully without them. The young up-and-comer Pierce Gagnon is nothing shy of amazing in his role as Sid, a young boy who gets caught in the middle of the two Joes' game of cat and mouse. The rest of the cast are perfectly adequate, but only serve to drive the story that centers around our main characters. The story starts incredibly strong and pulled me in right away. By the time Bruce Willis first appears, almost 45 minutes into the film, you are sucked completely in. Unfortunately, this is where the story takes a turn that starts to weigh down the suspense, tension, and especially action for the next 45 minutes. Director Rian Johnson only scratches the surface of all of the fantastic possibilities that can come from time travel. How is an older looper affected when their younger counterpart encounters things? What can a looper do? to change their destiny, even when they are made aware of a possible future. Many intriguing ideas are explored, but ultimately it all seems to take a backseat for a less interesting side. Story: the film is not completely lost due to this, however, but only suffers a drop in the rating scale from amazing to really good. The ending does a fine job of tying it all together, and I don't believe anyone left the theater. Disappointed Rian Johnson does bring some interesting new takes as a young and fresh director. The camera angles were unique without being shaky. Cam annoying. The score by Nathan Johnson is a bit unmemorable, but still has its moments of entertainment. Looper is a worthy installment in the realm of time travel. While I wouldn't go so far as to call it perfect, it does indeed entertain and makes you have to think at the same time. Rian Johnson's Looper, a smart and tricky sci-fi story, sidesteps the paradoxes of time travel by embracing them. Most time travel movies run into trouble in the final scenes when impossibilities pile up one upon another. This film leads to a startling conclusion that wipes out the story's paradoxes so neatly it's as if it never happened. You have to grin at the ingenuity of Johnson's screenplay. The movie takes place in 2044 and 2074, both of which look like plausible variations of the American present, and then there are a few scenes set in a futuristic Shanghai. We learn that although time travel is declared illegal once it has been discovered a crime, Syndicate cheats and uses it as a method for disposing of its enemies. Imagine this: a man with shotgun stands by himself in a field. A second man materializes out of thin air. The first man blasts a hole in him. The thin air guy who is bound and hooded is a man from the future who has been sent back in time to be assassinated. The shotgun guy is known as a looper. He has been sent back into time to be the trigger man. Eventually, when he grows old enough, he will be sent back in time to be killed by his own younger self. This is known as closing the loop, Joseph. Gordon-Levitt plays Joe the Trigger Man in 2044. Bruce Willis plays Old Joe sent back from the future. The loop is not closed. However, because Old Joe arrives without a hood and young Joe hesitates when he realizes his latest target is himself, he knew that would happen eventually. It's part of the deal. But a hood would have prevented him from knowing which victim was himself. This leads to the kind of weird scene that only time travel makes possible. The two Joes go to a nearby diner, grab a booth, and have a conversation. Imagine that you're sitting across from yourself with a 3-decade age difference. This is an opening for an endless conversation about the emote and metaphysical implications of the meeting, but Johnson perhaps wisely makes their conversation more pragmatic, perhaps professional. Hitmen aren't. Inclined toward philosophy, the story gains depth with the introduction of romance in most thrillers. Female characters tend toward eye candy and are extraneous to the plot. Not here. Young Joe meets Sarah Emily Blunt, a fiercely independent woman who lives on a Kansas farm with her son Sid Pierce Gagnon. Although young Joe has literally come from nowhere, they slowly grow close. In the future, we learn Old Joe was married and his wife, Summer Ching, was murdered by a figure known as the Rainmaker. It's not revealing too much to tell that Old Joe has reason to believe that young Sid may grow up to become the Rainmaker, and so Old and young Joe are trapped in a situation with no pleasant prospects. The film is further enriched by the performances of Jeff Daniels as Abe, the future boss of the crime SC, and by Paul Dano as Seth, a friend of Old Joe who fears the loop is about to be closed on him. Think this through. If the loop is closed on you, did you never exist, or did you live your younger life up until the point you kill your older self? Looper, to its credit, doesn't avoid this question. It's up to you to decide. If it answers it, time travel may be logically impossible, but once we allow a film to use it, we have to be grateful if it makes sense according to its own rules. Rian Johnson's first feature was the well-received low-budget indie titled Brick 2005, which told a high school story in a film nor style narrated by Gordon-Levitt. The second was The Con Man, Puzzlement, the Brothers Bloom 2009. Now time travel in all three. He begins with generic expectations and then confounds them. The key is in his writing, Looper weaves between past and present in a way that gives Johnson and his actors opportunities to create a surprisingly involving narrative. Other information about this film, Rian Johnson's Looper, is very exciting and very confusing at the same time, a gripping time travel sci-fi thriller indebted to Christopher Nolan's Memento and James Cameron's The Terminator, but with its own creepiness and muscular sense of urgency. Bewilderingly, the film is set in the future in 2044 and also 30 years further. Ahead than that in 2074, time travel is invented and at once made illegal by a nervous government. At the same time, surveillance technology and CSI-style forensic skills make killing people very difficult. So crime syndicates get hold of a CIS time travel device and use this to remove troublesome people. Victims are whooshed back in time 30 years, where lowly paid assassins blast them with shotguns and get paid in silver bars strapped to the victim's body. But there's a catch. The killers are known as loopers because one day they must close the loop. Their future middle-aged selves must be liquidated because they have amassed too much information about their employer, so are sent back in time for assassination with the special retirement payoff of gold. Bars strapped on the younger self must then pull the trigger and accept with as much Zenom as possible his disappearance in 30 years. One of these loopers is Joe, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt above, but when his older self, played by Bruce Willis, comes back, he somehow evades the execution, and Joe has to hunt himself down. As with all time travel movies, there's an awkward moment when one character asks plaintively about the logical impossibilities inherent in what's happening, and another character tells him to just shut up and forget about it. Of course, there is no sense in the time travel in Looper, but no less sense than in any other film in this genre. Johnson makes up for it with narrative, force mesmer, fascination, and a sense of profound taboo being broken. Gordon-Levitt is made up oddly to look like Willis's younger self, of course, but this has an uncanny effect, adding to the mutant strangeness that pervades the movie. It's different from the comedy in Robert Z. Back to the Future 1985, and the deadpan science in Shane Carth's cult indie primer 2004. There is violence and fear. Criminals have corrupted the very tenets of space and time. Jeff Daniels has a funny cameo as Abe the gang boss, who has to make excursions back in time to check this side of the operation is running smoothly. He is contemptuous of Joe taking French lessons and tells him to learn Mandarin because China is going to be all important. I'm from the future. I know. I left Looper dizzy with excitement and also just dizzy. There isn't a single soul I've met that wasn't enthralled by Rian Johnson's debut feature film. Brick, his retelling of the classic hard B tropes in a high school setting, was a tad cartoonish at times, but it packed the necessary visceral appeal to turn some heads and claim its full membership. To the hardbed, Club Looper looked quite different, despite being still hard-boiled. Influenced, and also starring the talented Joseph Gordon-Levitt, it's a cyberpunk film about the mind-warping issue of time travel. While I dug Looper, it didn't sweep me away like Brick did. 5 or 6 years ago, it's a quality movie that is obviously a labor of love, but it fight on too many fronts to be what it tries to be. Joe Gordon-Levitt is a looper, a hired gun who kills people from the future. The way it works is that you kill random people that mobster bring you and collect your paycheck taped on their back. It lasts until you kill your old self, hence the name. That way bodies disappear in the past, so they're wiped off the face of the earth, and so does loopers when they get old to soft only. Then you are declared retired and live however you see fit until they come for you. Loopers are starting to close the loop at a weirdly quick pace. Since Joe is a smartass and he happened to fall in love in the future, old Joe Willis has it all planned. He escaped his old self and aims to kill the Rainmaker, also known as the dude who made the future this way. I have an issue with films that have a particularly convoluted time travel. intrigue star. You spend so much energy trying to understand what is going on that it suffocates your drama. I don't see Looper being a particularly complicated film. Joe needs to kill old Joe because he wants to live longer and free himself from an already written future. Old Joe wants to live because he wants young Joe to live with future spouse in a world without a Damocles sword over their head. That's the essence of what's going on. If you want an overly complex what is going on time travel movie, watch Donnie. Darko, the storyline depends on it so much, people never really debate the cool points about blind conformity that the movie makes. Looper doesn't go that far, but the time travel is still somewhat a boulder in the living room, as it's deeply interwoven with the character development. Probably why so many people found it complicated. It's just that it juggles so many different plot elements and never really makes them come together. For example, how the hell did Sarah knew about the Loopers and didn't try to run away with her kid while Joe slept? And why was there a sex scene between them? It's the saddest sex scene ever, as it's motivated by solitude and fear. For a movie that relies on atmosphere, so much tension was deficient at times. But that's a pet peeve of mine. Let's talk about the cool stuff, because Looper delivers on that front first. Of all, it's a beautiful movie where the notion of cyberpunk isn't taken overboard. It's a bizarre, angsty, deformed mirror of our present, and not a deliberately eye-popping wasteland. Johnson mixes colorful scenes with gritty urban decay tones of gray, brown, black, and the result is visually stimulating. One thing that he could have corrected is that maybe his use of music was underwhelming. It wasn't minimalistic. It was bland. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is doing in human efforts to make you forget that half of his face really is, but during certain scenes, especially on daytime, it looks ridiculous. I also loved the play of Emily Blunt. I didn't quite understand the relevance of her character throughout most of the film, but man, is she beautiful, or what she convinced me of her troublesome yet motherly instinct. Quick word on the underrated Paul Dano, too, who plays the deadbeat and the desperate like no others. None of the cast has been outwardly bad, except maybe for Jeff Daniels, who can't sell being a villain to save his life. Looper also offers a fun debate on genetics and determinism. Is what going on part of a predetermined future? And would you let your future self dictate what's good for you, like a slightly abusive but well-intentioned dad would? I'm not going to spoil you the fun of going through this questioning, but I'll tell you that the ending lives up to the whole questioning. It's rare that I like an ending, but this one is worthy and doesn't spare any sensibilities. Rian. Johnson is both a talented director and a superb screenwriter. Looper aimed for the bleachers, but it's a single with 1 RBI. It's a good movie. It's just not going to leave its imprint on Johnson's legacy. It lacks the cohesion to become anybody's favorite movie, but don't be surprised to see it pop in the DVD Blu-ray stash of a few avid, yet then you really should before it's too late. The following review has been amended to include a more spoilerific addendum. Those who have not seen the movie shouldn't be too concerned. The key passage has been clearly marked towards the end of the review. Those who have seen it now have the opportunity to delve deeper into the many interesting twists and turns that this movie has to offer. Last year, I fell in love with Drive. This year, after the ensemble excellence of Avengers, we got the mostly convoluted in consequence of the disappointing Prometheus and the punchy but flawed conclusion to Nolan's Dark Knight saga. Thankfully, with the glut of summer blockbusters now at its end, great movies have once again started to appear on the horizon. I was blown away, literally, by Dread, and am keenly anticipating a return to form for Craig's Bond in October. Skyfall. Looper, however, was tipped to toop them all, with rave preview reviews calling it the best sci-fi movie since Moon, the best time travel movie since 12 Monkeys, and one of the best movies of 2012. They're not wrong, but these statements are somewhat misleading. It's more complicated than that, much more complicated. So complicated, in fact, that what I propose to do is offer up something of a teaser review which will hopefully whet your appetite in anticipation of the film's full release later this week and prepare the way for an ensuing and more comprehensive read. Once more people have seen it, if I can give you one piece of advice, don't underestimate this movie. Set in 2042, we find ourselves following the 25-year-old looper assassin Joseph Simmons, who lives a lavish lifestyle and has a fairly simple job he has to execute. Targets sent back in time by his mafia boss is 30 years in future. They appear before him with a shroud over their heads, hands tied behind their backs and kneeling. All he has to do is pull the trigger, job done. However, the loopers all know that their own days are numbered, as one day the person who will appear before them will be themselves. The trouble comes if you don't kill yourself. As Joseph soon finds out, I work as a specialized assassin in an outfit called the Loopers. When my organization from the future wants someone to die, they zap them back to me, and I eliminate the target from the future. The only rule is never let your target escape, even if your target is you. Right from the opening scene, this film has you hooked. Joseph Gordon-Levitt looking slightly different. They used prosthetics to make his nose and face more in line with what you would expect from a young Bruce. Willis is out in the fields killing people. He has an old pocket watch every while. Kill is timed to perfection. He spends his nights getting high. I drop drugs are the latest craze and trying unsuccessfully to woo his favorite prostitute into quitting her profession. When his older self turns up, everything gets spun on its head. We get to see in a sort of flash-forward SL flashback combo how his older self, who in that flashback evolves rather unconvincingly from Gordon-Levitt into Bruce Willis, came into existence, and what made him decide to change the course of the past in an attempt to change his own future. Confused? Well, don't be. It'll all make sense. At least this part will. This main premise, however, is far from the end of the story. The premise is little more than a great excuse for some interesting action set pieces, some cross-cutting between the two viewpoints of young and old Joe Gordon-Levitt and Willis, respectively, and some witty exchanges between the two of them in one scene, rather amusingly throwing us a curveball by completely dismissing the opportunity to provide an explanation as to the whole time travel logic. It's a good move. To make less is most definitely more. Yet beyond this premise is where the near genius of Looper lies. We're taken on a journey involving a tortured hero who has to do some heinous things because he thinks it's the right thing to do. Did I mention the near genius of the ideas on offer here? Well, it's tragic near genius if you think that being a young, highly paid assassin could give you psychological trauma. You wait until you see what happens to the same guy 30 years down the line. To say more would be to risk entering spoiler territory, but suffice to say there's plenty more on offer than just what you see in the trailer. Of course, the acting is across the board good, with sparks of great thrown in there. Gordon-Levitt certainly gets to prove his leading man chops in this sci-fi action thriller. He may have had an early career opportunity to headline a movie. Very impressive as the gritty young anti-hero of Brick, the stunning ultra-neon war debut from Looper writer-director Rian Johnson, but he's largely been relegated to supporting and or co-starring roles ever since inception. 500 Days of Summer Dark Night Rises, here he is most certainly the star, whilst his dramatic acting mettle is seldom really put to the test here, and whilst the prosthetic enhancements don't really fully convince us that he could be a younger Willis, especially since we know what Willis looked like when he was in his late 20s. The same, just with more hair. His performance skills are still impressive in much the same way that John Travolta was very good at acting like Nicolas Cage in Face Off Gordon. Levitt does a great job at acting like Bruce Willis. It may not be readily apparent during their scenes together, but there are plenty of earlier moments where Gordon-Levitt smiles dismissively, replies sarcastically, or just gives a trademark look that simply epitomizes everything iconic about Willis after 25 years of making movies. It's more impressive when you consider that it can't be all that easy to impersonate. Bruce Willis, remember, we're not talking parody here. He's not dressing up in a dirty vest and shooting his way barefoot through a skyscraper. We're talking about acting like Bruce Willis' support comes from the least expected corners, and from the least expected people there will be bloods. Paul Dano manages to evoke sympathy as Joe's fellow looper and friend who makes the one mistake a looper cannot afford to make, Piper Perabo Coyote Ugly. The Prestige shows us a refreshingly grungier side to her previously lightweight talents, and Jeff Daniels. Speed makes for a surprisingly menacing crime boss who is capable of scaring the hell out of you just by talking to you. It's a great assembly because almost all the actors, up to and including, go to psycho villain Garrick Dillahunt. Deadwood Last House on the Left are cast in ways where you don't quite know what to expect from their characters. Emily Blunt, the Adjustment Bureau, is probably the only one not to play against HPE, but she too is a welcome addition playing the kind of outwardly feisty, inwardly vulnerable, and irrepressibly gorgeous female character that she's usually known for. Actually, she has done one thing differently for this movie, chopped a few logs, and it shows in her biceps. Too ironically, although Gordon-Levitt is clearly the star and undeniably the focus of this piece, it's actually Willis who gets the best scenes and gets the opportunity within Send Them to showcase a far broader range than we're normally used to from him, whether it's the briefest of flashback moments or the haunting pain that they bring forth, whether it's the burning nausea or the horror within that comes as a result of his very necessary actions. Willis wears his emotions more visibly than John Lan ever would, but still has a great steely determination to do whatever it takes. Whether it's the moment where he's desperately trying to cling on to the ever-fading memory of the woman he loves, or the film's most controversial scene where he determines to and does what he feels is necessary to save a great deal of people in the future, including his wife, just so as not to rule selfishness out of the equation. These are things you probably never expected Willis to do. Never even expected him to be capable of. It's his finest work in years. Not to let the side down or disappoint on certain expectations, he also gets all the best action moments too, injecting a little bit of humor and more than a lot of drive into these very cool sequences indeed, when you think back to the fact that the best drama and best action goes to this guy. You'll be even more surprised when you realize just how little he is actually in the movie. Those familiar with Brick might have been worried by the notion of Rian Johnson taking his hand to a grandstanding sci-fi action thriller, but rest assured this is far more Children of Men than Total Recall 2012 in its depiction of the future, and Johnson has brought all of the tricks in his Brick playbook with him. Indeed, with a restrictive budget of just $60 million, he again goes for the distinct less is more motif, attempting to portray a future which doesn't actually look all that different from today. Taking us through gorgeous landscape shots of Midwestern vistas, Johnson shows a future where the best you could probably hope for is a little farm out in the middle of nowhere. No bodies wants to live in the dirty, polluted and crime-infested cities. Technology may have advanced. Mobile phones are way for thin. You don't type on keyboards. You type in thin air with light sensors beneath to pick up on your finger movements. And there is the occasional hover bike thrown in amidst all the beat-up Nines vehicles. But the cities still offer up a refreshingly industrial setting. All steel and smog, dirt, and chaos threats lurking in every shadow. Some might feel underwhelmed by the future, which looks the same, but it's not only much more realistic, but also much more fitting to the Nara. There's a wonderfully claustrophobic feel generated by this environment as, well, the merciless, oppressive surroundings is just poised, ready to close in and swallow you up if you don't. Keep on your toes, keep moving. Nothing feels safe, not for the rich, crooks, and certainly not for the impoverished multitude. If you're on the run, then you're on your own, and you've likely got nowhere to hide. We're not spoon-fed the narrative. Instead, events happen, and we build up a picture in our minds and use that information to fuel the ensuing tension, for example, rather than have the lead character narrate to us what would happen if he were to fail to kill his target. We get to see just what happens to somebody else. Thus, when the lead character is put in the same situation, we feel the tension, we feel the walls closing in around him, and we know what will happen if his enemies catch up with him. Stylistically, Johnson messes with that your mind happy to throw back and forth on the timeline, and you just have to go with it in the full knowledge that it will mostly become clear in the end. Keeping a track of the time travel twists and nonlinear ramifications isn't difficult. It won't give you the brain freeze of Inception, but it does have a pleasant intelligence to it, and after the credits have rolled, will have you warmly puzzling over the different iterations and the temporal paradoxes in a very satisfying fashion. This is one of the 4 most adult movies I've seen this year, all in succession and all out. In the same month, dread Lawless Looper and Kill Them Softly, although not wearing the same 18 certificate as the others. This is still clearly R-rated material, more important than the violence, however, is the dark story, which is definitely designed for adults. In this environment, anybody can die at any point, and their deaths will be harsh and painful and inglorious. It also means that the heroes are far from clean and pretty firmly in near your redeemable anti-hero territory. The raw punch certainly helps elevate this film from its teen target ed brethren. This isn't just intelligent sci-fi, it's intelligent adult sci-fi, relentlessly dark and bleakly violent. Of course, you can't go into it expecting the wow factor of The Matrix or the lavish big-budget effects of Inception. This isn't a slick, big sci-fi thriller. Hell, it doesn't even go for the full steampunk Blade Runner look. It's far more low-key, and you should expect as much. It's not necessarily a case of lowering your expectations. It's a case of expecting the right thing. Comparisons to the likes of Children of Men and Moon or 12 Monkeys, and even as one sharp forumite has pointed out, The Terminator will fare far more favorably and likely set you up to enjoy this piece rather than wonder why it wasn't everything that it was cut up to be. Don't come out of it saying, well, that's not the next Matrix. Nobody ever said it was going to be, and you shouldn't expect it to be. It's no less brilliant, though. Superbly acted, impressively directed, and extreme well-written Looper is indeed one of the best movies of 2012. It's got a fantastic cast, a well-thought-out plot, which twists and turns through a largely coherent time travel scenario, dialogue, injected with some refreshing wit, and heavy performances from all the least expected directions. It provides 2 hours of thrills and a bucket load of surprises as well as a few excellent action beats. It doesn't end there. However, I highly recommend that at this stage, if you haven't done so already, you book your tickets and plan to see this as soon as possible. You won't be disappointed. And if you are, well, then I'm going to take a big leap and say that you didn't fully get the ending. The rest of this review contains mild spoilers. It won't ruin the film for those who haven't seen it, but it is really only for those who have seen the previews or are at the very least extremely curious, still reading, just seen the movie. Well, try your best to remember the last shot and try and think through to the first loop. The first iteration Looper has the kind of ending which will have you immediately satisfied. Then, if you think about it for a little while, be confused, and then if you obsess over it a bit more, have a damn epiphany. And that right there is the spark of genius. I can see why some have struggled with the ending, though, leading to numerous good but not great ratings and reviews, as well as the masterpiece ones taken logically with as much logic as you can hope to apply to a movie about time travel. The ending introduces a twist that some might think is excellent. Some might find deep flaws in, whilst others might clock the flaws, but work towards them to create some kind of explanation far from being frustrating, like the problematic Prometheus or ending up some kind of flawed science logic wannabe source code. Although Looper doesn't spoon-feed you any clear-cut answers, it does give you a nice sense of brain-frying satisfaction in attempting to figure things out. Spend a few minutes, an hour, or however long it takes mulling it over by yourself or with friends, and hopefully you'll come to some decent conclusions. You'll ask questions like, does this really stop the endless cycle of violence, and if the Rainmaker was created by them? How did he come into existence in the timeline where they didn't exist? The questions have no obvious simple answers, but perhaps that's the beauty of it. It doesn't make complete sense, but it has enough room to maneuver for it to be possible to make sense. The director tried his best to come up with a working time travel system, but did, after all, loosely base this on the concept of the Terminator, so problems were inevitable. However, in some candid interviews that he's given since the movie was released, he's tried his best to offer some answers, most of which have amounted to every event that takes place to the younger Joe has ramifications on the future, which will affect the past as remembered by the older Joe. His memories are changing. That's the beauty of Looper. Its ideas are natural and organic, and therefore allow us to buy into a time travel concept, which works for once because it works on the basis that everything is in flux. Let this movie sink in and penetrate to the dark recesses of your mind, and it might blow it wide open. This is a movie that demands attention, requires feedback, and warrants discussion. I'll leave you with one teaser element that the director clearly had in mind when he came up with the idea for Looper, arguably the morality paradigm at the core of the whole drama. Looper review Riddick's 3 weeks after release. And let's see whether this has had as big an impact as I'd hoped for. Let's take a look behind the mysteries of one of the best sci-fi movies in years, superbly acted, impressively directed, and extremely well written. Looper is indeed one of the best movies of 2012. It's got a fantastic cast, a well-thought plot which twists and turns through a largely coherent time travel scenario, dialogue injected with some refreshing wit, and heavy performances from all the least expected directions. It provides 2 hours of thrills and a bucket load of surprises, as well as a few excellent action beats. It doesn't end there. However, let this movie sink in and penetrate to the dark recesses of your mind, and it might blow it wide open. This is a movie that demands attention, requires feedback, and warrants discussion. It's a great movie that will make you think, even if you don't realize it. At first explained in a gritty film noir voiceover style, the city in 2044 has been ravaged by poverty and overrun by crime vagrants and abandoned jalopies. Fill the streets of what might be Kansas City or Wichita, a crummy metropolis surrounded by farm fields and controlled by the criminal underworld. Here, 10% of the population has developed meager telekinetic abilities and impresses each other by levitating coins the extent of their talent. Time travel hasn't been invented yet, but by 2070 a one-way system has been refined and outlawed, utilized only by the ruling criminal class who send their hits back 30 years, where a looper kills them and disposes of all evidence. The looper waits at a specific time and place, and the victim suddenly appears, hooded, hands bound and kneeling. The looper fires his blunderbuss and collects his silver bar, payday, strapped to the victim's back every once. In a while, a looper finds a gold payday on the victim's back, which means they've killed their future selves. This is called closing the loop, and with it begins a 30-year countdown to the looper's own demise. Every few years, a superior genre film comes along and retunes our expectations for what great science fiction filmmaking should be. Rian Johnson's Looper belongs on a short list of monumental sci-fi pictures that are imaginative, thoughtful, emotionally involved, and never predictable. Along with Steven Spielberg's Minority Report, Richard Linklater's A Scanner Darkly, and Christopher Nolan's Inception, Johnson's film contains a carefully considered future world that seems plausible and matter-of-fact. The setting isn't approached with a sense of faux wonder. His characters are a part of their world. They know its limitations, and they are not impressed by its clunky hover bikes and eye-drop hallucinogens as a film. About time travel, Johnson considers the paradoxes inherent to rules he establishes described in clever detail. And never violated by the turns in his story, the implications are clear without his characters engaging in unnatural exposition by making diagrams with straws in this world anti-hero looper. Joe Simmons, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, kills for a living, having been recruited at a young age by Abe Jeff Daniels, a crim lord sent back from the future to manage loopers. Joe spent his days wiping the future's human garbage from the timeline, and his nights on drugs and Bing prostitutes, he's not a very nice guy. However, this lifestyle is wearing on him. Although he's one of the best, Joe makes a mistake by harboring a fellow looper. On the lam, nervy and helpless, Joe's friend Seth Paul Dano faced his older self on the looper slab and couldn't pull the trigger. Now old Seth is running free, and Abe wants young Seth dead for the trouble. Many loops like this have been closed as of late. The future's top crime, lord known only as the Rainmaker. Apparently cleaning house not long after Seth's demise, Joe experiences the same face-to-face conundrum when old Joe Bruce Willis appears before him, except, unlike the future's other victims, old Joe's hands aren't tied and his head isn't hooded. The Joes look into each other's eyes for a moment of recognition that allows old Joe to take advantage of his younger self's hesitation and escape. With this, Johnson shifts the perspective. Now the film proceeds from old Joe's viewpoint, and we see what the future would hold for young Joe had he actually closed his loop and spent the next 30 years living off the gold bar rewards. He moves to Shanghai, where drugs and crime rule his life, until old Joe finally meets a Chinese woman, Ching-Su Shi. Cleans him up and saves him. They fall in love and settle down. Life is perfect. Until, of course, the future's crim lord, the Rainmaker, sends him back in time to be assassinated by his younger self. Old Joe would do anything to maintain his perfect version of his future. And so, dropped in 2044, he sets out to find and execute the Rainmaker, who would only be a child in that time, in a plot. Point similar to the Terminator, old Joe tracks down 3 possible children that might be the Rainmaker, who once dead will be unable to break up his happy future. Existence, however cruel it might seem. Think of it this way. If you could travel back to the year 1900 and gun down the 10-year-old version of Adolf Hitler, wouldn't you do it in a stroke of genius plotting? Johnson shifts perspectives. Again to a Kansas farmhouse where single mother Sarah Emily Blunt lives with her son Sid Pierce Gunyon, the boy being one of the children on old Joe's hit list. Young Joe, now on the run from Abe's goons and hunting old Joe to restore balance to his own life, hides out in Sarah's cane fields and gradually becomes a trusted friend, just as we can sympathize with old Joe's mission to save the world. From the Rainmaker's cruel hand, we can understand when Sarah argues that she will raise Sid, possibly the Rainmaker, to do good with his staggeringly powerful telekinetic abilities instead of the malevolence he seems destined for. Now we question the logic of killing young Hitler. Why not simply raise him to be a better person throughout the film? Johnson toys with our sympathies and confronts our understanding of the usual time travel motives, so by the climax, we're engaged in the objectives of each character. And yet when the conclusion at last arrives, it's such a pitch-perfect and satisfying finish that we couldn't imagine it ending any other way. Johnson's marriage of hyperrealism and high-concept sci-fi elements feels like a natural progression in his career from his debut with 2005's High School Noir, Brick, to his mammoth-inspired con movie The Brothers Bloom in 2008, adopting Philip K. Dick-worthy genre consideration. Johnson again incorporates Raymond Chandler-style complexity into his cartooned narrative, whereby the turns keep us guessing, but also never devolve into futurist wonderment, unlike something like Star Trek or Avatar, in which we're intended to sit back in awe of the production designer's formation of this future world. Johnson takes careful steps to integrate us, for example, to make the transition from Gordon-Levitt to Willis a believable one. The younger actor wears subtle makeup prostheses to reshape his nose and mouth, along with this Gordon-Levitt's half-smirks create and, at times, uncanny resemblance to Willis. It's also a testament to the younger actor's willingness to lose himself in a role, whereas an actor with less integrity may have wanted to save face. To assure his audience can recognize him, the film's acting is superb in part because Johnson's characters have such intricate descriptions, while his scenario pulls our sympathy in multiple directions at once. Gordon-Levitt goes from criminal hero to self-serving villain to compassionate family man. Every transition natural within the story, his range in material from the lookout to 50-50, and then in actioner. Roles like this year's underseen premium rush continues to expand and impress, while it's all encapsulated here, Willis. Returning to time travel after his part in Terry Gilliam's decisive take in 12 Monkeys, also returns to credible. Non-self-referential acting. As of late, his career has been bogged down by ironic performances in Cope Out and The Expendables 2. But the die-hard star proved twice in 2012 that he's still a viable screen presence, first in Moonrise Kingdom and now Looper, to see Willis in an actionized role that doesn't require him winking at the screen is a real treat. Blunt lends the emotional center of the piece, whereas Gagnon, creepy yet uncannily sophisticated, shows the presence of an actor far beyond his years. Dano is so good in his brief scenes that one wishes his character had survived a little longer before his shocking demise. Looper is the kind of film that only comes along every so often. It's cerebral, yet filled with substantial dramatic pole exploring both brainy, scientific, theory and multidimensional characters with equal levels of inspection and inventiveness. Johnson's treatment contains a maturity and energy that displays the trappings of a confident filmmaker, pouring his talent into every subtle science fiction detail, every sharply deliberate camera movement, and every emotional progression of his characters. The high degree of verisimilitude on display is counteracted by Johnson's refusal to get caught up in meaningless sci-fi flourishes, resulting in a film whose drive is as singular as its compelling narrative. This is all compounded by the story's surprising humanism, which binds us to the material and engages us in unexpected ways. Finally, in every respect, it's an exciting and rewarding motion picture experience, one that will leave its audience buzzing long afterward and desperate to see again. In short, Looper is a visionary film and an instant classic. This film, directed by Rian Johnson, written by Rian Johnson, produced by Ram Bergman, James Dearn, starring Bruce Willis, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Emily Blunt, Paul Dan, Noah, Sean Piper, Perabo, Jeff Daniels, cinematography, Steve Yedlin. Edited by Bob, say music by Nathan Johnson, production companies TriStar, Pictures FilmDistrict, Endgame Entertainment, DMG Entertainment, Ram. Bergman Productions, distributed by TriStar Pictures. Release states September 6, 2012 in TIFF, September 28, 2012 in United States. Running time 118 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $30 million, box office 177.65 million. So guys, this is the review of Looper movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.